Geography is one of those subjects where we assume we know way more than we actually do. We grow up hearing things that sound right, so we never bother to fact-check them. Let's start with the facts that you have totally screwed up. 1. Taiwan is part of the People's Republic of China. This is one of the biggest geopolitical debates of our time. While China claims Taiwan as part of its territory, Taiwan operates as an independent nation with its own government, elections, military, and even passports. It's not just some province under Beijing's rule. However, most countries, due to diplomatic reasons, don't officially recognize Taiwan as a separate country, even though it functions like one. 2. Johannesburg is the capital of South Africa. If you were asked to name the capital of South Africa, there's a good chance you'd say Johannesburg. But guess what? That's wrong. South Africa actually has 3 capitals, and Johannesburg isn't one of them. Pretoria serves as the administrative capital, Cape Town is the legislative capital, and Bloemfontein is the judicial capital. So why does everyone assume Johannesburg is the capital? Probably because it's the largest city and the country's economic powerhouse. But in terms of official status, it doesn't make the cut. 3. Cyprus is in Europe. If you look at a map, Cyprus seems like it belongs in Europe, and culturally, it feels European. But geographically, it's actually part of Asia. It's located in the eastern Mediterranean, near Turkey, Syria, and Lebanon. However, Cyprus is a member of the European Union, uses the euro, and has deep historical and political ties with Europe. 4. Timbuktu is a mythical place. People often use Timbuktu as a way to describe a place that's far away and possibly imaginary. But here's the truth. Timbuktu is real. It's a historic city in Mali, West Africa, and was once a thriving center of trade, scholarship, and Islamic culture. In the 14th and 15th centuries, Timbuktu was famous for its wealth and knowledge, home to one of the world's oldest universities. While it may not be the golden city of legend today, it's very much a real place with a rich history. 5. Monaco has an airport. Monaco is one of the smallest countries in the world, squeezed into just over 2 square kilometers. And while it's a glamorous destination with yachts and casinos, it does not have an airport. If you want to fly into Monaco, you actually have to land in Nice, France, and then take a car or a helicopter to Monaco. 6th. Ethiopia was colonized. Unlike most African nations, Ethiopia was never fully colonized. While Italy did attempt to take over, Ethiopian forces famously defeated the Italians in the Battle of Adwa in 1896. It was only briefly occupied by Italy from 1936 to 1941 during Mussolini's fascist rule, but Ethiopia never became a permanent colony. This makes it one of the few African nations that maintained its independence throughout the colonial era. 7. Cape Horn is the southernmost city. Cape Horn, located at the tip of South America, is famous for its dangerous waters and stormy weather. But it's not actually the southernmost city in the world. That title goes to Ushuaia, Argentina, which is the southernmost city with a significant population. Ushuaia is often called the end of the world because it's the last major stop before reaching Antarctica. Cape Horn, on the other hand, is more of a landmark than a city. 8. Seoul is closer to New York than to Alaska. It might seem like New York and Seoul are closer to each other than Seoul is to Alaska, but that's not the case. In reality, Anchorage, Alaska, is much closer to Seoul than New York is. This misconception comes from the way maps flatten the world, making distances appear different than they actually are. 9. India's postal system is ordinary. Think your country's postal system is impressive? Well, India's postal network is on another level. It has the largest postal system in the world, with over 150,000 post offices, many in remote locations. But the most fascinating part is that India even has a floating post office on Dal Lake in Kashmir. 10. The Black Sea has tides. Most seas and oceans experience tides caused by the gravitational pull of the moon. But the Black Sea, not so much. Because of its limited connection to larger bodies of water like the Mediterranean, tidal movements in the Black Sea are almost non-existent. While there are small fluctuations in water levels due to wind and atmospheric pressure, you won't see the dramatic rising and falling tides like you do in other seas. 11th. Drilling through the Earth takes 42 seconds. There's this fun fact floating around that if you could drill a tunnel through the Earth and drop something in, it would take exactly 42 seconds to reach the other side. That's only true in a perfect vacuum. In reality, the Earth's molten core, air resistance, and structural integrity make this completely impossible. Plus, gravity would pull you back toward the center before you could even make it to the other side. 12. Istanbul is still called Constantinople. It's been almost a century since the name officially changed, yet some people still call Istanbul Constantinople. The city, which was once the capital of the Byzantine Empire, was renamed Istanbul in 1930 by the Turkish government. The name change was part of a broader effort to modernize Turkey. 13. America refers only to the United States. People often say America when they're talking about the United States, but technically, America includes both North and South America. The US isn't the only country on the continents. If you travel to Latin America, many people refer to themselves as Americans because they too live on the American continent. The correct term for someone from the US is actually American citizen, or US national. But let's be honest, no one really says that. 14. Spanish is the most spoken native language. It's true that Spanish is widely spoken, but it's not the most spoken native language in the world. That title goes to Mandarin Chinese, which has over 900 million native speakers. Spanish comes in second, but it's far behind Mandarin in terms of total speakers. So while Spanish is useful and widely spoken, Mandarin dominates in terms of sheer numbers. 15. Polar bears and penguins live together. Thanks to cartoons and movies, people often think polar bears and penguins hang out together, but they don't. Polar bears live in the Arctic, North Pole, while penguins are found in the Antarctic, South Pole. They are literally on opposite ends of the Earth. 16. Sharks can smell a drop of blood from miles away. We've all heard this one before. If you're bleeding in the ocean, a shark miles away will instantly detect it and come swimming toward you. But that's a huge exaggeration. Sharks do have an incredibly sensitive sense of smell, and they can detect blood in the water, but not from miles away. 17. Gorillas are aggressive to humans. Movies and cartoons have made gorillas seem like fierce, chest-thumping monsters who attack anything that moves. But in reality, gorillas are actually quite shy and peaceful. They live in tight family groups and are generally gentle unless they feel threatened. Most of the time, if a gorilla beats its chest, it's not an act of aggression, it's more of a warning or a way to communicate within its troop. They would rather avoid conflict than engage in a fight. And they rarely show aggression toward humans unless provoked. 18. Earth's core is solid iron. The center of the Earth is often described as a solid ball of iron, but that's not entirely true. While the inner core is solid due to intense pressure, the outer core is actually a liquid layer of molten metal, mostly iron and nickel. This outer liquid core is what creates Earth's magnetic field. Scientists have figured this out through seismic studies, and by analyzing how earthquake waves move through different layers of the Earth, they can tell which parts are solid and which are liquid. 19. A compass always points north. If you've ever used a compass, you probably noticed that the needle always seems to point north. But that's actually magnetic north, not true north, and the difference between the two matters. Magnetic north is the direction of the Earth's magnetic field, and it shifts over time due to changes in the molten metal inside the planet. True north, on the other hand, is the geographic North Pole, the fixed point where all lines of longitude converge. The difference between the two is called magnetic declination, and it varies depending on where you are in the world. 20. Oxygen comes mainly from trees. It's a common belief that the Amazon rainforest is the lungs of the Earth and produces most of our oxygen. While trees and forests do play a role in oxygen production, the majority of the oxygen we breathe actually comes from the ocean. Specifically, tiny marine organisms called phytoplankton are responsible for producing at least 50% of the world's oxygen through photosynthesis. These microscopic plants float near the ocean's surface and absorb carbon dioxide while releasing oxygen, just like trees do on land. This doesn't mean we should stop protecting forests. 21. The ozone layer is gone. For years, we've been hearing about the ozone hole, and some people assume that means the entire ozone layer is gone. But that's not the case. The ozone layer is still there, and in fact, it's recovering. The ozone layer is a protective shield in the Earth's atmosphere that absorbs harmful UV radiation from the sun. In the 1980s, scientists discovered a massive hole over Antarctica caused by chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, chemicals found in aerosols and refrigerants. This led to global action, and in 1987, the Montreal Protocol was signed to phase out CFCs. 22. A year is exactly 365 days. We celebrate New Year's Eve every 365 days, so it's easy to assume that's exactly how long a year is. But in reality, a year is about 365.24 days long, which is why we have leap years every 4 years. That extra 0.24 days might not seem like a big deal, but over time, it would throw our calendars way off if we didn't adjust for it. Without leap years, seasons would slowly drift, and eventually, we'd be celebrating Christmas in the middle of summer. 23. You can't drink seawater. This one is half true. You definitely shouldn't drink seawater in its natural state, but that doesn't mean it's impossible to make it drinkable. Seawater is packed with salt, and drinking too much of it can dehydrate you rather than quench your thirst. But with desalination, the salt can be removed, making it safe to drink. 24. Earth has only one moon. Most people think the Earth has just one moon, but the reality is a little more complicated. While the moon is the only permanent natural satellite, our planet occasionally captures small asteroids in its orbit. These mini-moons don't stay long, but they do technically count as temporary moons. One of the most famous examples is 2020 CD3, a small asteroid that orbited Earth for about 3 years before being ejected back into space. Scientists have observed similar temporary moons before, proving that the moon isn't Earth's only companion, it's just the only one that sticks around long-term. 25. Pluto is no longer a planet. Poor Pluto, it was a planet, then it wasn't. And now people aren't sure what to call it, but the truth is, Pluto is still a planet, just a different kind. In 2006, the International Astronomical Union, IAU, redefined what it means to be a planet, and Pluto didn't meet the new criteria. It was reclassified as a dwarf planet, meaning it's still a planetary body, just not one of the major 8. So while Pluto may have lost its original title, it's still out there, orbiting the Sun just like the rest of the planets, with a slightly different classification. 26. Space is completely silent. We've all heard that space is a vacuum, meaning there's no air for sound waves to travel through. This is mostly true. If you were floating in space, you wouldn't hear anything the way you do on Earth. But space isn't completely silent. Sound waves can travel through extremely dense gas clouds found in certain parts of space, like nebulae. Scientists have even recorded low-frequency sounds coming from black holes in distant galaxies using special instruments. You wouldn't hear these sounds with your ears, but space is not as silent as Hollywood makes it seem. 27. The sun is on fire. When people look at the sun, they often describe it as a giant ball of fire. But technically, that's not correct. Fire, as we know it on Earth, needs oxygen to burn, and there's no oxygen in space. Instead, the sun is powered by nuclear fusion, a process where hydrogen atoms are smashed together under intense pressure and heat to form helium. This releases massive amounts of energy, which is what we see as sunlight. So while the sun is incredibly hot, it's not burning the way a campfire or candle does. 28. All developing countries are poor. The term developing country is often associated with poverty, but this is misleading. Many developing countries actually have strong economies, growing middle classes, and advanced technology sectors. For example, countries like China, India, Brazil, and Mexico are classified as developing, but have some of the largest economies in the world. Even smaller nations like Malaysia and Thailand have booming industries and high standards of living in many areas. The term developing is more about economic structure and industrialization rather than just wealth. 29th. Rich countries have higher birth rates. It might seem logical to assume that wealthier countries have higher birth rates because people can afford to have more children, but the opposite is true. In fact, developed countries tend to have lower birth rates because of factors like higher education levels, career priorities, access to contraception, and changing lifestyle choices. Nations like Japan, Germany, and South Korea have some of the lowest birth rates in the world despite being wealthy. 30. All Native Americans lived in teepees. Hollywood movies have created a strong image of Native Americans living in teepees, but that was only true for some tribes, mainly the Plains Indians, like the Sioux and Cheyenne, who lived a nomadic lifestyle. Other tribes had completely different homes. The Iroquois lived in longhouses, the Pueblo peoples built adobe villages, and the Inuit in the Arctic created igloos and sod houses. Different environments required different housing styles, and teepees were just one of many. 31. The majority of migrants moved to the U.S. It's easy to think that most migrants head straight for the United States, but that's not actually the case. While the U.S. is one of the top destinations, other countries receive just as many, if not more, migrants each year. For example, Germany has one of the highest immigration rates in the world, largely due to refugees and skilled laborers seeking opportunities. Saudi Arabia has millions of migrant workers from South Asia and Africa. Even Russia has a significant migrant population due to its labor market. And that wraps up our 31 geography facts you totally screwed up. We've gone through myths about space, oceans, wildlife, migration, and even the shape of our own planet. Hopefully, you learned something new and can now proudly correct anyone who spreads these common misconceptions. So next time you hear a fun fact about the Earth, take a second to think because sometimes even the most obvious truths turn out to be myths. Hope you enjoyed this video.